Today on The Future of Everything, the future of energy efficiency. Climate change and global warming are generally understood to stem from human impacts on the environment. Especially over the last 200 years, humans have used wood, coal, oil, gas, and other natural resources to fuel a ponderous industrial age. These natural resources, however, are not infinite, and they do not burn cleanly or safely in many cases. So there are challenges with long-term supply and with environmental impacts that are dangerous to the health and even the existence of future generations of humans, not to mention plants and other animals. So many governments have recognized the need to create incentives in two directions. First, to find sustainable energy sources, wind, water, and others that are efficient and do not damage the environment. And second, to help humanity use available energy more efficiently, effectively, in order to reduce the demand per person, even while the world population continues to increase. But guess what? It turns out that, like many other resources, clean energy is not distributed evenly, either globally or even within American society. Companies and individuals do not always have even access to the technologies and financial incentives that are required to change behavior. This is particularly true for disadvantaged communities, communities of color, and Black communities. Anthony Kinslow is a lecturer in civil and environmental engineering at Stanford University and the CEO of Gemini Solutions, a company devoted to overcoming cultural, socio-economic barriers to broad energy efficiency. Anthony, what is the history of energy policies that have created this, what you have called, clean energy divide?
Russ, thanks for having me. So the history is one that's America's history, right? It's the history of racism. It's the history of those with wealth having access and opportunities, and those without it suffering the burdens of pollution, of lack of access to housing. Many of your listeners probably are aware of redlining, the redlining district, where you would actually, where different areas were actually redlined to prevent folks from moving into different communities and to keep people into areas that all the industrial spaces were being constructed, where you have a disproportionate amount of pollution and health issues coming through.
So yeah, so you outlined these conditions which come up in many discussions about injustice. Can you draw the line between those circumstances and lack of access to clean energy alternatives and lack of access to clean energy environments? So I think people, in my research preparing for our conversation, I was just surprised to see that in some cases this was even codified. It wasn't just like bad luck or a correlation between being poor and being marginalized and bad energy, but sometimes there was actually codified laws and regulations that perpetuated this. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And that'll get us into our discussion about what we can do about it.
Yeah, absolutely. We could think about how the federal government has provided incentives to certain groups of people and not to others, resulting in the access and the quality of housing that folks live in. Not so geographically where they live, but also the quality of housing that they live in. And it's a clear line based on race. And so when you think about kind of what's happening now in the inequities that exist today, it wasn't just happenstance, it was designed.
Yes, fascinating. Now, what were those incentives? Just for people who don't feel like they've received these incentives or are not aware of that ecosystem that I know you live in, what are the kinds of incentives that have been established in the past for that would drive this?
Yeah, the GI Bill was one that really benefited white Americans, and a lot of minorities were not able to access that. That allowed folks to go to college, right? Loans for housing, right? Which was not given to minority groups, but was given to white Americans. Are the two major ones, right? Where you start establishing a you have your own ownership of the home, you have mortgages that you can take advantage of and start realizing generational wealth.
Yes. And so as an engineer, you look at that, and in addition to all of the other unfairness that that could introduce, you're also looking at it in terms of the houses that they actually physically live in and the neighborhoods in which they live in might be not efficient with respect to things like insulation or airflow and other things that really cost real money to overcome in terms of, I don't want to freeze at night, I want to be cool in the summer. And is that what you see? Because you are, after all, an environmental engineer. When you look at these homes, is that what it boils down to in many cases?
Yeah, and the term what you'll often hear is energy burden, right? How much of the amount of money that you make goes into paying for energy to stay comfortable in your own home. Oftentimes, you find people who don't have a lot of money will be uncomfortable in their own home just to save some money and have to decide between paying their energy bill and paying their health bill, or how much they buy for food for their family.
So it's real money for them, and it's a real
Absolutely.
toll. So that gets to actually one of the questions I really was interested in asking, which is, when I first heard about your work, I said to myself, if you're a struggling family, where you're trying to make ends meet and holding down multiple jobs, there's health issues, all the things that happen when a family is struggling, I could imagine it would be hard to get them fired up about their energy situation. Like I'm imagining, Anthony, you going to a community and saying, okay, this is a big problem. Is it indeed hard to get people fired up about this because they have so many other things they're worrying about? Or do people see the connection and kind of get activated by these arguments?
Well, it's a misnomer to that folks who are low income or folks who are minorities, people of color, don't care about the environment, don't care about climate change, or get fired up about these things. Really, this stems from two aspects. One is people receive information and what they care about differently. So culturally, if you're not speaking to them in a way that is culturally relevant, it doesn't matter what you're talking to them about, it's not going to resonate.
Right.
So that's one aspect. And the second aspect is the solutions, right? Like, you're telling someone to get fired up about something, and then they have no possible way of actually paying for the solution to what they're supposed to be getting fired up about.
Yes.
And so what we see is, what we end up seeing in the world is a certain group having the Teslas, a certain group having the solar panels on their homes, and we instantly associate that with, oh, they care and others don't.
Right.
Which is not the case. And in fact, it's what we've seen from surveys, national surveys, some done by Stanford, what we've is that people of color care more about climate change and want the government to do more on average. What we've seen from case studies where you provide an accessible solution, there's faster adoption within communities of color of energy efficiency and other clean energy technologies. So it's a real shame that people think like that, and it also that perception also drives where solution providers go to, right?
Right.
So it starts to become this cycle.
Like a positive feedback loop in the wrong direction.
Yes.
This is the future of everything. I'm Russ Altman. I'm speaking with Anthony Kinslow, and we're talking about clean energy, and especially in disadvantaged communities. We've been focusing a little bit on the individual households and their response, but this is also a business thing, if I understand your work, in terms
Yes.
of Black-owned businesses and other businesses. What's the situation there?
Well, what we're seeing, especially after the murder of George Floyd, what we've been seeing is an increase in acknowledgement and focus on minority businesses, especially Black businesses within the clean energy sector. I know several people who have received seed funding and capital A round fundraisings for their business. And I think this is critically important, because if we're going to actually reach, we talk about 100% clean energy, we need to reach 100% of everyone. Well, we need a diversity of businesses in this space to reach those different communities. So we've been seeing an increase of that. I'm hoping that it keeps going. And these folks have some great solutions that are no longer just reaching the standard what we've seen before, but those who have been underserved and ignored in the past.
So I almost hate to ask this question, but I feel compelled to. Are those businesses suffering any unfair practices? In other words, are they struggling in any way more than other startup businesses? We all know that a new business is a tough. You're in the middle of it. Is a tough road. But are there structural issues there? For example, are they getting the clean energy credits that that the equivalent companies are getting, or are there problems there?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Challenges, I should say.
yes. So I think the easiest way to explain this is risk, right? When someone sees a black face, there's an assumed additional risk, whether it be in financing or energy or any other thing, that there's a risk associated with investing in them. There's a risk associated, a perceived risk of whether they can do the job, whether they're as qualified, et cetera. And what you see is individuals in the market, whether they're a black solar company, a black energy efficiency company, right? They need to be more qualified. They need to have more evidence for someone to trust that they can continue doing that. There's not this inherent trust of, oh, you know, you went to, say, Stanford, and I believe you can get it done, right? There needs to be extra aspects and characteristics on top of that. So really what it comes down to, the challenges comes through this idea of a perception of risk when that occurs.
So you do have this company, Gemini Solutions. I very briefly summarized the vision, but tell us a little bit more about how you see this as part of the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing you have to understand is that energy audits, and specifically investment grade energy audits, is critical to realizing the clean energy economy. It's the first thing you should do.
So you might have to help us break that down, because I don't know what an energy audit is.
Yes, thank you. So energy audit is when you, it's essentially a cost benefit analysis of improvements to a building space. So identifying what's wrong with the building in terms of energy, right? Where is it losing energy? Where are some opportunities for energy savings? And then giving you a cost and of what, and some recommendations to improve the energy efficiency of your space. So it's like the base, establishing a baseline and providing recommendations for your building.
So it sounds like engineers come in, they do like what engineers do. They break everything down, they figure out the ins and the outs, the costs, and they say, you need, you know, X, Y, Z changes to your building in order to make it better and more efficient.
Exactly.
Okay, so now we know what an energy. So now I will let you continue this sentence that I interrupted.
No, thank you for that. And so without an energy audit, without an investment grade energy audit, where banks can have confidence in investing into the providing a loan for this retrofit.
That's what investment grade means. It means that the people who have the money will trust this audit as a basis for their decision making. Exactly.
And so right now, 90% of the commercial building stock is cost prohibitive for them to receive an investment grade energy audit. Okay. So when we think about trying to transition to a clean energy economy, 90% of the 90% of commercial buildings, which is over 4 million commercial buildings, really are going to have a hard time doing so without being able to get an investment grade energy audit, which means they can't get a loan for upgrades.
So that's a super important point, because that means that this is not just the Black community. There are a lot of small businesses who are going to have the same problem, which is good, I would say, because then you have more demand for change.
Absolutely. This is not strictly just a race issue. This is really any small business who wants to move into the clean energy space. They have this roadblock in the form of an investment grade energy audit. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to democratize the small commercial energy audit sector. We've automated a lot of the processes, the analyses and the report writing, such that we are now hiring and training data collectors all across the country to implement investment grade energy audits for small businesses.
Okay, so it
Essentially,
sounds like we have to nerd out a little bit here. Can you paint a picture of the kinds of technologies or the kinds of innovations that you can bring to lessen the cost of these, what I assume to be otherwise very expensive audits?
absolutely. So what people often don't realize is that small commercial buildings, while they're all different, you may have a restaurant, you may have a dry cleaners, maybe a church, right? They all have the same systems and typically the same type of systems. What we call, for your heating and cooling, you have a package unit, right? Those things you see on the roof, and everybody has them. And so your analysis of them is pretty standard. And so
Uh,
we're able to automate that analysis, and by only collecting a certain specific um, on-site data, we can estimate what your savings would be if you switch from a package unit to a heat pump, which is all electric and extraordinarily more energy efficient.
uh, Okay, so great. So it sounds like there's a certain amount of data driven. Let's take advantage of data that we know and some uniformity in the actual products that are deployed to make it more efficient. And then I would guess that your other challenge is making sure that the banks, those investment grade, that you can get them to accept these less expensive but hopefully just as good audits.
Absolutely. And there's a budding market of certifications out there that is trying to normalize what an energy audit report would look like, what the analysis are, such that banks across the country can have a certain level threshold of understanding that this is investment grade energy audit, this was not. And Gemini has already received those certifications. So really, it's we've we're reaching a threshold where when we give you a report, you can take that and get it and use it to get a loan for upgrades if that's what you want.
This is the future of everything. I'm Russ Altman. More with Dr. Anthony Kinslow about clean energy, energy audits, and bridging the climate and energy divide next on SiriusXM. Welcome back to the future of everything. I'm Russ Altman. I'm speaking with Anthony Kinslow, and we're talking about energy and the challenges of bringing a 100% energy efficient economy and population. So at the end of the segment, we were talking about all the challenges, both at the individual level and also at the company level. And one of the things you've talked about is that we have to undergo a transition and it has to be fast. So first of all, tell me what the transition is that we need to make, and then why does it have to be fast?
Yes. So the transition is away from fossil fuels and how we move from place to place, fossil fuels from our buildings and what our buildings consume. And that means no more natural gas. And if you think about all the buildings that use natural gas for heating, for cooking, we can't reach our climate goals with natural gas. It's just that simple. And the reason we have to go fast is climate change. I think all of us from Texas to California and throughout the Southeast are experiencing just a small bit of what we're going to be seeing more and more frequently and more and more severely is that the environment that we live in is going to be fundamentally changed, and it's going to really push the limits of the cost and survival for the human race.
Okay, good. So I got that. And so when you say fast, you're an engineer. What does fast mean in this context? It's not going to happen tomorrow, but it sounds like you have a certain impatience. What do you think is a reasonable speed that we need to do to get this transition completed?
Well, I like to think about how we thought about getting to the moon, right? When John F. Kennedy said we'll get to the moon, the NASA engineers had no idea how to get there at the time, right? And the same time frame is what I'm looking at. I think we need to be going for 2030 as our goal.
Okay, so this is a
That's what the
decade.
yeah, we have a decade to make significant, dramatic changes to the way that we consume energy and the form that that energy is produced.
So great. So that's a sobering goal, but kind of exciting. As an engineer and a small business person, do you see the ducks aligned? in terms of the major people who have to agree with you about this transition? How far are we even to getting a consensus view that this needs to happen?
I think we're seeing the shift happen that the shift is starting to accelerate, right? The past administration was not a fan of climate change. It was, you look at the current administration, there's a clear distinction between what they're what they say about climate change, what they say needs to be to happen. So while there's still not a lot of work that needs to be done, I'm actually pretty encouraged with the shift that we're seeing from the federal, state, and local level.
Great. And once these things accelerate, there is a little bit of in a good sense, a little piling on phenomenon where everybody just kind of says, okay, fine, I'm sign me up. So another thing that you've talked about is the need to move away from debt-based solutions for energy management. And I don't know what that is either, forgive me. So if you could define what is a debt-based solution and where do we need to move to?
Yeah, so debt-based, the most known debt-based solution that we have is loans, right? And we've been talking throughout this conversation about loans being what's needed, but to actually to obtain a retrofit of your building, become more green. But the reality is, what that means is you're going into debt. When you get a loan, you're going into debt. And so when I say debt-based solutions will not get the job done, it's because there's a whole vast majority of Americans who either do not want to go in debt for this or cannot go into debt for this, right? They're already in debt because of medical bills. I mean, this global pandemic that we're experiencing now has taken all those people who were just living paycheck to paycheck and pushed them over the edge.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so if you think about, we need everybody to switch to clean energy, but not everybody can do so in a debt-based way, right? They can't charge it to their credit card. Their credit card's already maxed out. So that's what I mean by a debt-based solution is not going to get us there.
Are there good solutions that have been proposed? Does it have to be a grant? Could it be what are the ways to get those folks the resources? Because that sounds like a tough problem.
Yeah, it's actually there are solutions out there. One is tariff on bill. It's where the utility is investing in a site. So instead of it being that you're doing a loan, the utility is making an investment in a property, a cost-effective investment, and receiving repayment for that investment through a tariff on the bill, right? So now all of a sudden it's no longer tied to the person living in that space, whether they're a renter or the owner, right? It's tied to the meter. And as thus, we start to, using tariff on bill, we start to avoid or circumvent some of these major challenges like the tenant to owner relationship. That has been a major barrier in a lot of ways, especially in residential.
Yeah, no, I see where that might give a little bit of upside to the company. It distributes to all of us who would benefit from this transition. Everybody who's paying their bill is going to be contributing to that utility and therefore kind of holding up the whole system. And you can take some of that acute burden off the folks who are not in a position to take it on right now.
Yeah, and we're finding is that utilities actually make money by doing this. So it's not a charity case. This actually makes a business sense for utilities to do this. And we're seeing many utilities start to incorporate this from electric cooperatives like Roanoke Electric in North Carolina all the way to Ameren in Missouri.
So this is being prototyped. This is not a theoretical thing.
This is not a theoretical.
Folks doing this.
We've been seeing it for years now, and it's just growing more and more. I believe it's in 7 different states now. 15 utilities or so have tried this, and yeah, there's also a big thing is there's been 0 examples of cutoff for non-payment, right? So if you think about we go back to the race issue where people of color are having their energy cut off for non-payment, and this idea of loans, everything, and you see tariff on bill where we haven't, over the thousands of homes have received this investment, right?
No, that sounds
Mhm.
incredibly exciting. And like the data, and then as those utilities start reporting out on their long-term experience, you could imagine, again, as we talked about a moment ago, a snowball effect.
Exactly. That's what we're hoping for.
So I wanted to end asking you about how the government can help nudge this along, and have there been any signs of kind of positive developments in terms of putting leaders in place that are going to that understand these opportunities and can help manage the transition, as you call it?
Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of encouraging signs from this federal government. Uh, the folks that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are bringing on, such as Shalonda Baker as Deputy Director for Energy Justice at the Department of Energy, and other names like that, who uh, are bona fide individuals who have shown and are engaged within the communities, who understand the barriers of racism and poverty that have prevented acceleration of our transition to a clean energy economy, and not just understand it, but are actively and vocally working to address it. Is something that I think is going to be one of the driving forces for why we're going to see a dramatic shift in the coming years. Uh, and then I'll also say the infrastructure bill that I know is being debated and that has to be passed, I believe, by September.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to have hundreds of billions of dollars of stimulus coming in for energy efficiency, for clean energy, and 40% of that is going to be going to communities of color, right? So these are changes that are revolutionary, that are necessary, and quite frankly are well overdue.
Yeah, that really is exciting. And it actually starts to paint a picture, especially in the last 5-6 minutes, we've painted a picture about how there's a number of these snowballs that are starting to go. And so it actually looks quite good for the Anthony Kinslow Decade Challenge of 100% energy efficiency. So thank you very much. And thank you everyone for listening to The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman. If you missed any of this episode, listen anytime on demand with the SiriusXM app.